if you follow the news closely, not too long ago, that I spoke to Scott and regarding the nation of Senegal, as we mentioned before, lately, those countries in Africa are making much greater noises. In this episode, let's shift our attention to another critical nation in Africa, which is Uganda. Well, in May, Uganda signed into a law by the president, a measure that expanded the country's current criminalization of homosexuality. Now, even so-called the promotion of homosexuality in Uganda today is illegal, and sometimes homosexuality can lead to execution. But on the other hand, homosexuality is criminalized in more than 30, get this, 30 of Africa's 54 countries. Some Africans see it as a behavior imported from abroad and not a sexual orientation. But meanwhile, why does that relate to what's happening in the US today? But somehow the politicians in America today got so ticked off because the Uganda's anti-LGBT bill. What is the relationship between those two? And how should we understand the military ties between the two countries as well? Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, if you follow our show, you should be familiar with our distinguished speaker, who is Scott Morgan. Scott has been the president of Red Eagle Enterprises since its inception in November 2012. He uses his military experiences from serving the U.S. military to address various projects. Again, he's expert on numerous issues, critical matters within the continent of Africa. Well, Scott, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you, my brother. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, Scott, again, it's I would say crucial topic for us to talk about in Uganda. Now, before we get into this anti-LGBT or anti-homosexuality debate in Uganda, I think it's crucial for our viewers to understand the current relationship between US and Uganda from this geopolitical and also this military relationship. I'm going to read something to you and I want you to explain something to us. According to the research, that US officials have regarded Uganda as a critical security partner in East Africa over a decade. According to the Congressional Research Service, the U.S. Defense Department has spent more than $280 million on equipment and training for Uganda since 2011. Scott, again, you're the expert. Walk us through what is the relationship and what is the investment for U.S. government to train and equip in Uganda?
The easy answer is its location. The reason why the U.S. military has reached out to Uganda and it's for two actions that they have taken in Africa. They are one of the largest suppliers, sources of troops for the UN, for the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia, which is currently being phased down and will totally end by 2024. And also, UPDF, the Uganda military, is also active in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, undertaking operations against both the ADF, Allied Democratic Forces, which is a Ugandan which is a militia which originated in Western Uganda, now holding out in the Eastern DRC. And the troops have also been active against the M23 militia, which has resurged due to decisions made by the government in Kinshasa, and have been receiving support from its neighbor Rwanda. So those are the two key areas where Uganda is a very important partner of the United States.
But meanwhile, Scott, again, let's go back to this significant number. Again, the U.S. Defense Department has spent more than $280 million on equipment and training for Uganda. We know that the budget for overseas spending is crucial, particularly for United States of America. But meanwhile, we shall see, or we should be able to see, some effective results or some effective measures after seeing the spending or after pouring the money into the country. Again, Scott, so far, based on the spending and also based on the investment, have we seen any productive or any fruitful results that based on what you just described? So in other words, is United States actually wasting the money for training and also for offering or maybe perhaps the polishing the equipment in Uganda? Is it time for US to change or shift its strategy in Uganda?
That may be too early to tell. One of the questions is, could Uganda benefit from new leadership? As you know, President Museveni is now one of the longest tenured leaders in Uganda. And everybody focuses on the relationship between the UPDF and the U.S. military. However, there have been a couple of interesting moves regarding that. First, regarding the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a new term for the U.S. defense budget. As you know, there are now two competing versions of that legislation. The House version, there's a version in the House which has some measures in it domestically about LGBT issues. And then the Senate has a version which does not have any of those issues. So that will go into a conference committee where both the House and the Senate will hammer out a deal to see what the defense budget will look like before it gets sent to the White House for signage. But most people focus on the security relationship. But also recently, there have been two other issues that have risen to the forefront that people, especially those who are faithful, should be concerned about. First is earlier this week in The Hague during the International Criminal Court they gathered evidence regarding an investigation. They are investigating Uganda for the activities and the crackdown and torture of supporters of the political opposition, including Bobby Wine. As you know, earlier this week, testimony was collected, and even the President Museveni's supporters are like, yes, we agree that we agree with this effort, and we hope that those who are the actual perpetrators are brought to justice. But also under the radar is another concern which very few in the media have been talking about. There has been a problem over the last 24, 36 months within Eastern Uganda. We are seeing a pattern of evangelists being attacked, promoting Christianity, and having people convert from Islam to Christianity. These people have been attacked by mobs, including their own family members. There has been a reluctance by the Ugandan police to investigate these crimes, incidents, or even prosecute anyone. There has also been a reluctance for these incidents to make it into the 24-hour news cycle. Most of the times this information comes out is through the activities of Christian media outlets. This issue is overshadowed by other concerns regarding Uganda, whether it's the activities around the election cycle, and other concerns is that people focus solely on the anti-LGBT law, which, if you read it, it's very similar to a law that Russia passed a couple of years ago. that is the relationship between the son of President Museveni, who was also being the target of the investigation by the ICC, with the Russian army. That should be a concern. He has actually offered to send Ugandan troops to Moscow to defend against the putsch that Wagner made. And he's also willing to, his actual term used was to defend against the imperialists. Which that rationale will also explain why the anti-LGBT law came into force. This is not, and also we should also remember, this is not the first time we saw this in Ugandan politics. Back in, I believe it was 2005 or 2006, there was a similar crackdown against the LGBT community. There was a magazine there called Red Pepper, and somehow they received the mugshots of those arrested for LGBT offenses. And their mugshots were placed on the cover of the magazine. And to see this happen within 2 decades, it shows that this could actually be a distraction, because at that time, the main boogie boy against the Museveni government was Joseph Kony and the LRA. And so, and that could, so then you have to wonder, is the anti-LGBT law a distraction against some of the other concerns? The role of the Ugandan military in the Eastern DRC. We know that there has not been any Ugandan troops mentioned caught up in the recent offensive by Al-Shabaab in Somalia yet. The operative word there is yet. We know that the Al-Shabaab has attacked Kenyan, Ethiopian, and even tried to attack American troops already twice within the last week. So with the anti-LGBT law, and then you have these other issues regarding the ICC investigation and the complete overlook of what's happening to the Christians in the eastern Uganda, show that although the anti-LGBT law is a good way to draw focus onto Uganda, although it may not be for the reasons that they should, it's a good mechanism to use.
Scott, I want to get our conversation started on this anti-homosexuality bill, or what we called anti-LGBT bill. Again, one simple question that we have to talk about is, this seemed to be one domestic issue, not an international topic. But meanwhile, according to the article that you share with me, the politicians in the US today get so angry about what's happening in Uganda, especially towards the anti-LGBT community in this country. Again, the law signed in May, particularly targeting for the LGBT community in Uganda. But one thing that boggles our mind, or one thing that I don't quite understand, is why is this a reason for the US perhaps stop the funding or stop the investing for Uganda? So in other words, what is the correlation between the LGBT community in Uganda and also the LGBT community or advocate in the US? Why does the US politician care so much about what's happening in Uganda today? Is this actually only about the violation of human rights, or is this only about this, I guess, what we called economic partnership or political alliance or whatever you call it? So again, let's get to the root of this. What is the relationship?
I would say that this is actually a policy goal of the Biden administration. Because, the Biden administration has a reputation of being friendly to the LGBT community. And this is a case where the State Department and others within the executive branch could this could be a way for that side to hold them accountable for stated goals of the administration, because the Biden administration has promised, if necessary, he will, at the appropriate time, they will levy sanctions. In the recently voted on NDAA, there was an attempt by several members of Congress who are LGBT, who actually wanted to attach a rider or which is an amendment to the NDAA requiring that the U.S. suspend military assistance to Uganda over the anti-LGBT bill. I have not seen any reporting about that language being accepted into the NDAA, but there was pro-LGBT language for the domestic part in the U.S. regarding that bill. So that has gotten covered. So, and that is a victory. If it survives, will be a victory for the White House and not for Speaker McCarthy, as some people are believing. So this is also, it's partway, and as you said earlier, this is also a domestic Ugandan issue. But addressing this is also an issue within the Democratic Party here in the U.S. And if I can actually do a little bit of foreshadowing, there has been a similar legislation introduced in Kenya as well with similar language. It hasn't been brought up to a vote yet. It hasn't had the first reading yet, although plans are in place to do that. So, and this will actually place more pressure on the State Department and the White House, because that raises interesting questions. Could there be a different response to how Kenya does the legislation as opposed to Uganda? Uganda has a traditionally better relationship with Russia than Kenya does. Kenya has always had a better relationship with the U.S. So in the long run, that could actually place an increased pressure on the U.S. about how it handles. If the reaction to what Uganda did is different than what could actually happen in Kenya, that would actually, then we'll start seeing cause of the Biden administration being hypocrites again.
Scott, two more questions before letting you go. Let's talk about, again, something you mentioned previously regarding the religious conflict, particularly related to the Christians and evangelicals in Uganda. Now, I want to read something to you and let's get into discussion. Based on the current Uganda's constitution and also other laws that actually provide for religious freedom, including the right to propagate one's faith and also convert from one faith to another. But meanwhile, Muslims make up no more than 12% of Uganda's population, with high concentrations in the eastern area of the country. But again, recently we've seen a lot of attacks purposefully that targeted for the Christians and also the evangelical communities in Uganda. Scott, what is the purpose of that? I mean, again, the Constitution protects the religious freedom and also understands the presence of the Christian community. Why are the Christians today actually being attacked or being targeted by other groups or by other religious affiliations? What do you say to that?
And you forgot one key point. Sometimes these people actually have been attacked by members of their family or extended family. And as you know, those who seek to leave Islam are not looked upon favorably by those who still remain in the faith. And it's what's happening in Uganda. We've seen in other parts of the Middle East and Africa with apostasy and blasphemy laws there are 12 countries that actually make this a crime, and then I have it on the books that apostasy and blasphemy laws is actually a capital offense. And so you hear about this, the lack of, one of the things that also draws me to this is the lack of coverage. I mean, very few people are actually raising this issue, except for some Christian outlets like Morning Star News, like Christianity Today, Christian Post. Those are the outlets that are actually covering this story. You don't see it in the mainstream Ugandan media, nor in other regional media outlets. And it's almost like they don't want this problem to exist. And sadly, some issues like this, they're almost spiked, killed for a political reason. But the lack of investigation by the security police and the security forces is actually surprising as well. And why does Islam in most cases make it so difficult for people who want to leave to leave? That has been one of the great questions. It's people being ostracized from their families and their villages. It's almost like, say, they treat it as an insult that people want to leave. Is it right? Is it right for this to happen? No. I mean, in some ways, this will make Uganda look like Pakistan, look like Iran. The unwillingness for this to be addressed. We know the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is looking into the election issues regarding 2021. I mean, this hasn't even, the attacks on the Christians in the eastern part of Uganda have not even made it to the UN Human Rights Council yet. So it makes you wonder if there's an actual agenda at play here. What is it? And what is it? Because as you know, when most people think of Muslim militancy in Uganda, they refer to the Allied Democratic Forces that started in the western mountainous part of Uganda and then moved over into the DRC to take advantage of that conflict zone. But then you also have to, we're also talking about a part of Uganda which borders Kenya. So, and we know Al-Shabaab has also been active in Lamau and Garissa counties, which is both counties are nowhere near the Uganda border. But as we have seen in other parts of Africa with militant movements, acts that have actually been able to have cross borders with little or no interruption, makes you wonder, has ISIS or Al-Shabaab or other militant movements, do they actually have a presence in eastern Uganda that Western intelligence services and even the Ugandans are overlooking? That is a possible answer to this, and no one has really thought to take a look into this yet. Because why would these incidents occur, sometimes within families, and the police do not investigate?
Scott, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, going back to this anti-LGBT community movement, or what we saw law, that how much do you think that it could generate much greater noises among the members within the community? So in other words, are we going to see a wave of protests? Are we going to see that under the social or political pressure from the US and also domestically, that this government could actually walk away or maybe overturn the law? How much do you think is going to happen?
One thing is, before President Museveni signed this into law, he actually sent it back to Parliament.
Mm.
So, and then he asked for more amendments before they sent him a version which he liked, and then he signed into law. So that avenue, so that attempt to protest by the LGBT community, which, judging by how the security forces reacted during the 2021 elections and the ICC investigation for that, as much as they want to, they probably will not be massive street protests, because for the simple fact that yes, they are. There's an investigation into how the security forces acted there, and that investigation is ongoing. Would the government hold back about how the protests are going to be put down? That scrutiny right now could make it that the government would not react as brutally as they have in the past. But as we've seen in the past, with harassment of journalists and others, including Bobby Wine, even after the 2021 elections, they probably don't feel the conditions are safe enough for them to launch protests. And as for international scrutiny from the West, they just may shrug it off, and say, we're more aligned with Russia. And there's another fact that about Uganda that most Americans are not aware of, is that Uganda in the past has helped North Korea break sanctions by distributing North Korean arms throughout Africa. So the Museveni government, although it does realize there are some instances where it has security interests with the United States, it does not always share some of the values that the United States holds dear. And one of them is actually are enshrined in the First Amendment: the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, which is still an issue in Uganda, and of course the right to practice their their religion freely, which we have seen in the East is an issue which very few people are talking about, except for people like us.
Of course. Well, again, Scott, it looks like the country of Uganda still has a long way to go when we talk about, again, as you mentioned before, the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, and also how we're supposed to understand the value of basic human rights. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Scott Morgan. Again, Scott has been a regular writer and also a contributor to the militantwire.com, and also he's very active on social media. And also, of course, that he follows our show and appear on our show on numerous episodes regarding the continent of Africa and also around the world. So, Scott, thank you so much again for taking your time and help us with better understanding about the nation of Uganda. And we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to follow and also monitor the progress within the continent of Africa. So thank you so much for doing this.